Welcome to Anecdotes for Success with Matt and Paul. Storytelling is an art form, emphasizing the value and learning that is created through personal experience. Our purpose is to share these stories and experiences with the listener. Everyone has a powerful testimony. Let's use them to level up to our best life with truth, meaning, trade-offs, and perspective.
Big shout out to Isaac Mather for the new podcast intro. You can check Isaac's music out on all socials or directly at isaacmathermusic.com. All right, another week, another episode. Matt, we have John Dunkle on tonight, and I'm going to stop talking because I usually say too much in the beginning. But John, welcome. Tell us about yourself. Go back as far as you want to go, and then the conversation will start.
Great. Well, thank you. And as I was getting ready for this tonight, I was like thinking, okay, what am I going to say that's going to be of any meaning to anybody? And I was, thinking about, where I am now. I'm a psychologist. I was trained as a psychologist. And I was a first generation college student. My parents never graduated from high school. And somehow I made it all the way to get a PhD. I don't know how I did it to this day. Growing up in upstate New York, and I'll say a little bit more about that in a bit, but it's really, when I think about it, I'm like, how did I do that? And I was really reflecting on, what your title, Anecdotes for Success. I love that. What are anecdotes? Well, they're really unscientific observations. And so I'm going to give you some unscientific observations as I reflected and prepared for this evening. So as I said, I got my PhD, and then after I completed, I went through all the SUNY system in New York. Okay. Started out at a community college and then went all the way up to get my doctorate at University of Albany. But anyway, after that, I went and worked at a very prestigious institution, Northwestern University, for 25 years. And I developed, an expertise in working on college student mental health, which is a huge issue today for a number of reasons. And then the last 3.5 years, I came here to New York City, and I worked for a great nonprofit organization called the JED Foundation, which its vision is to promote the mental health and prevent suicide amongst our nation's teens and young adults. And I get the chance to work with a lot of colleges and universities. I've visited, I think, 60 since I've been here. And so we help them develop strategic plans and whatnot. So that's a little bit about my professional, but what, I thought about how did I get here? And I have it in sort of 3 buckets, and they're not in any specific order. They're all inextricably linked. But I think the first thing I thought about is what drove me is the importance of key relationships in my life. People who really help shape me. And that starts, of course, with family, parents, and teachers, and a whole bunch. But there's a famous quote that I love from the movie Amistad. I don't know if you've ever seen it. It was in the late 90s. Great movie with Anthony Hopkins. And he was playing, John Quincy Adams, and he was arguing before the Supreme Court after he became president. And in there, the quote was, "We might acknowledge that our individuality, which we so revere, is not entirely our own." That really stuck with me, because what that means to me is that, while we have our own identities, they're shaped by so many people in our lives, starting with family. And they can be good or positive or negative influences. Hopefully there's more positive than negative. But, I think about the key people in my life, and my parents, of course, but they were very key, still are. They were, as I said, they never graduated from high school. They worked in supermarkets all of our lives. And they worked really hard. They taught us, to work hard, don't complain, don't whine. And I think that has really remained with me all these years after I left. They really, also taught us not to, they taught us to respect people. They taught us to be kind, to be caring, all those types of things. And, as I said, they worked hard. They would get up at 4:30 in the morning and go to work. And that, like I said, I'm a morning person to this day, by the way. Really, you know, and they didn't tell us to work hard or anything. We learned it from just simply from the eloquence of their example. And so they were really key. And then, of course, later, as I went through as I grew up, I had keys. Teachers were very big for me, and professors who took me under their wings and really helped mentor me and helped me to sort of, they helped nurture my interests and my education. So anyway, they were all very influential on me, and colleagues, of course, and supervisors over the years have really, helped shape me. So I would say the first big thing is relationships in my life. And being a psychologist, that's something that I talk about all the time, and never underestimate the importance of one's relationships.
Well, John, not to interrupt you on this, but I am. You bring up relationships, and I immediately glanced at Paul, and I saw him kind of grin as well. We talk as a business person, that's entrepreneur. That's how I identify, right? Although, to your point, what are all the influences that shaped that, right? From the quote you just gave, which was great, but it's all relationships. It's we talk about it all the time. I just always say relationships are everything. And I mean that they're so important, they're so valuable, and it's just wonderful to hear from your perspective how important and not only influential they have been in your life, but that you recognize that and list it as one of the most important things. I guess it just validates maybe our opinion on the subject, right, Paul?
Yeah, and I joke about it every year. I mean, as an educator going into my 27th year, I don't know if kids even remember what I talk about in the classroom, but they love their relationships. And been going through some stuff this past week with a death of a past student, and the relationships, it's front and center 101. Every time, like, sorry, my body language, when you said relationships, Matt's looking at me, I'm looking at him, and I'm like, boom. John, it's what it's all about. Family, friends. Well, I'll let you continue, but yes.
Well, it made me think of another quote now that I wasn't going to say, but it just made me think of. I love quotes.
Let's hear it.
Maya Angelou once said, "People never remember what you say; they don't remember what you do. They remember how you made them feel."
Yep.
And I think that's true.
It's perfect. Yeah, very true.
So many people don't understand that, though. Like,
yeah,
it makes me sick. But
yes, absolutely. And I think the next bucket that I'm calling them that I thought about is, I've always been someone, and I don't know how I developed this, but I've always been very self-reflective and always working on self-awareness. And I think I got it because, growing up in upstate New York, it was a very rural area. We didn't have, internet back then or cell phones. My God, we didn't have cable TV. We got 2 channels.
Sorry to interrupt. I don't know if you have any of that still where your parents live, but go ahead.
Oh, they do actually now. But we got 2 channels and 3 on a good night if the weather cooperated and the antenna was turned just the right way. But anyway, that's all to say that, I had a lot of time to think and reflect. I was very, very reflective, and I spent a lot of time alone. And on hindsight, I think that where that partly came from was that I was still developing my identity, and a big part of my identity, which came later, was coming out as gay. And it was something that you didn't talk about back then. And certainly there were a lot of role models that were obvious and available. And it was for a boy growing up in a very rural area, that was a very lonely place to be. And so it to the point where at one point I even contemplated suicide. And somehow I was able to work through that. And I think part of it is because, my parents were loving. They cared about us, and we had that. And I had key people in my life, but it was an extremely lonely place. And like I said, we didn't have all the internet and everything back then to be able to see examples and role models and whatnot. But I told myself when decided after I got into college, I was going to study Spanish at first, but then I ended up studying psychology because I took a course at Corning Community College and I just loved it. And
Hey, John, do you remember who your teacher was?
Yes, it was Benny Hunsinger.
Okay. I went to Corning as well, and I took I still talk about a psychology teacher to this day. His name was Joe Hannock, and I don't know.
Oh yeah.
I was just wondering if I didn't go down that path, of course, like you did, but I was mesmerized by that class, and I took several of them, even though I was not studying the topic. I was just curious curious if it was the same teacher. It wasn't, but it wouldn't have shocked me at all because he had a big influence in my life. One of the few memories I have of that time. Anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I had to ask.
No, and real quick, Benny, Stacy talked about him. Like I've talked to multiple people that the the professor he was a legend.
Oh yeah, I mean he's the reason why I credit him for really for my interest in developing interest in becoming a psychologist because the two courses I took with him.
Okay.
You know, his social psych course especially, that was my favorite course. But you know, and then down the road, you know, I realized that part of my drive to want to help people and be a psychologist is I didn't want anyone else to be alone like I was. And to develop whatever they needed to develop so that they could work past any type of crisis like that. And so the self-reflection is something that is so important. And I don't think people do enough of that either. We talked about not recognizing the importance of relationships. I think we sometimes can go down a path of really fooling ourselves and thinking that, you know, not being honest with what our strengths are, what our weaknesses are. And I think that somehow I developed a talent or a natural ability to self-reflect. And I think that's what makes me a good psychologist.
John, why do you think people don't do a very good job with that? Is it I'm afraid I don't want to face face the truth in some sense? You know, is that we all like to pretend we're the star of our own movie, I guess. I mean, what do you think that is professionally?
Well, I think it could be a number of things. I think it depends on the person, but I think shame is one, guilt. I think you know, embarrassment, that people can't you know, admit to themselves what their areas of growth are and what they need to do, and then accentuate what your strengths are. You know, you don't need to have strengths in everything. And I think that that's a part of this culture in the United States, especially, that we try to be everything and we can't. That's just not realistic.
No, it's not. As a business person myself and someone who's likes to think he's trying to be the best person he can, whether it's a husband, a father, a leader, a friend, you know, whatever the case may be. You know, one of the things that I believe in and try to teach when I have the opportunity is, hey, you're going to have things you're not as good at. You don't have to maybe work. I try to be the best I can in my areas of strength. To accentuate those strengths in order to lead to the kind of successes I value at times. And it doesn't mean, you know, hey, I'm a real jerk, I'll just continue to be a jerk. I'm not saying that, but I like to focus on my strengths, and I think that's a good strategy for a lot of things. Probably not for everything, but for a lot of things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you're familiar with the Clifton Strengths Finder, that's the whole basis of that. You know, the idea that, you know, accentuate what your strengths are. You're not going to have strengths in everything.
Okay.
But yeah, I think that's a big piece of it. But the self-awareness is something that I'm very I actually love spending time alone. I think it's because growing up where I did, and that's why I think when I talk with people and when I was in my practice as a psychologist, you know, what drove that is I'm genuinely interested in each person's story. I want to learn, because one of my top strengths on that strengths finder that I was mentioning to you is context, meaning
Okay.
I like to understand every person where they're coming from. I think that's what makes me a good psychologist, part of it.
Right.
So,
Hey, John, let me back up and ask you a question about you. You'd mentioned, when you were, I think you said in high school when you said you came out as gay.
not until actually I started graduate school in Albany, much later.
Oh, okay,
Oh, wow.
okay. So you were
I thought
say
the
that.
same thing. Yeah.
Oh.
you were older. I was just going to ask you, and obviously, anything personal, you don't have to don't feel obligated, but what was that like in a time where, I don't know how old you are. I assume we're somewhat in the same generation. And, like you talked about, there were not models for, and this is coming from someone who's straight. I didn't give it a lot of thought. It was, but I don't know what that would have been like without, looking to someone and saying, there's a success story and I'm like that in some sense. I mean, what was that like?
Well, I'll tell you, privately, through my high school years, I knew early on that something was different. I didn't know what it was called. I didn't know how to label it, but something was different. And as I got into high school, and then certainly into my undergraduate, I started to privately, I don't want to say accept yet. I was trying to tolerate this part of myself. So it's sort of a process. And one of the things that coming out as gay does is that you develop really good radar, because you're really attuned to people thinking something about you.
Okay.
And so I tried to fit in. I was really good at making friends. I'm a pretty sociable person, I think, because partly I have a good sense of humor, which is another key. I have a good sense of humor, and I see the funny and stuff. And so I think that helped me. But then when I went to graduate school in Albany, that really, I started to really explore more. And I started to meet new people. That's the other thing. As you go and get education, I got out of Elmira, New York, that small town, and I started to meet people that were very different than I, in so many ways. And the price cannot be put on that education. Most of what you learn in college is not in a classroom. It's in the out of the classroom. It's in your activities. It's in the relationships you form. And that did a lot for me. And I started to meet people who were gay. And I started to publicly come out finally. And so, no, it wasn't easy. It was a very lonely place, especially where I was living in Elmira. But as I got out and explored the world through education, that changed the whole show for me. It was big.
Yeah, interesting. You make a good point on I was just having a conversation today about kind of education, and there's a lot of conversation about, is it worth it right today, the cost of it versus the debt people take on, and the conversation turned to, are we talking about that, or are we talking about the experience of it, and what you just described, that kind of one's almost a commodity, right? Just, I can get the education, I can go on YouTube and listen to classes that are being taught at Harvard every day, right? Anyone can do that, or some example of that. But it's the other aspect. It's what Paul and I call perspective. When you say Paul and I call the perspective from other people from different backgrounds, different different races, different cultures, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that is, and not to mention having to go on your own, right? And for the first time, make sure you get to wherever you're going on time, or actually, feed yourself or do your laundry, or those types of things that actually, that truly mean something, beyond, what you get, what was your GPA kind of thing. So interesting that you bring that up too.
Real quick, I mean, that triggered me. The education part, like there's a big homeschool movement now. There's a big, we don't need public schools. We don't need the stress kids are put under. I get all that. But I also feel like you're missing out on how to handle all that stuff. Like there's nothing fair sometimes about what town you're from or what you do or what the people think of you or when it comes to college, I don't even know if you can sometimes put a monetary value on are you going to make what you're paying to go to school? But I look at both you. I'm staring at both you in a Zoom, but I think of both of you. I think of my wife. I think of a lot of other people that go to community college. You have all these credits, and then you go to you are both SUNY grads. We didn't even touch base. You have a lot more in common than you think you do, and the experiences are sometimes, well, a lot of times worth it if you can control some of the other expenses. And I'm ranting a little because I'm an educator, but I socially all that is so important in your journey, right?
Absolutely. You can't put a price tag on that, in my opinion.
No.
And I'm a big believer in young people having that experience as much as they can, whether they choose to go to school after high school or work.
Right.
Opening yourself up to experiences that stretch you, because that's how you grow. That's how you learn. So that happened for me. I mean, I can't even tell you of the course. Let's see. I graduated from Cortland in my bachelor's.
I went to Cortland too, John.
Yeah, there you go. I got my master's there too. And I graduated from there in 1988 with my bachelor's and 1990 with my master's. And, I still have friends from there. I mean, I have a friend who lives here in Long Island and he has season tickets to the Giants game. So he's taken me to those since I've been here in New York. So anyway, and, then moving out to Chicago for 25 years where, a beautiful city. I'm moving back there actually in a couple of weeks.
Oh, good.
Yeah, I lived there for 25 years and, I still have friends there who really are like family to me. And so that really shaped me, that whole experience, and still does. So, but I think the last thing that I would say, my last bucket that sort of, I think, flows.
Yeah, I wanted to get back to the last bucket. You have relationships and you have self-reflection.
The other one that's somewhat related, and I think it's inextricably linked, is I think I've been blessed with a sense of resiliency and the ability to bounce back from, defeats and failures. And it also means I'm open to change. I'm open to, I see every situation as a learning opportunity. And another quote that I'll give you that I think of is from Nelson Mandela. He said, "I never lose. I either win or I learn." And that to me is a very definition of resiliency, in my opinion. If you're open to, seeing what you might see as a failure, it's a great learning opportunity. That's why I was blessed with that skill. And I think I learned that from my parents. I think I learned that from my family. Like I said, we never whined. You do your job, you get it done. Every job's important. It wasn't a lot of touchy-feely, but it helped us to navigate tough times. So
sure. John, we're alike in that as well. I mean, as an entrepreneur, resilience it's a must. I mean, you're gonna fail. And I've done it plenty of times. And I also know I'm not done doing it because I continue to want to push, my boundaries, and that comes with the cost of taking on failure at times. But also, like your quote from Nelson Mandela, if you learn from it, it's not a failure. And I know that's cliche, and you hear, but it's really true as a guy who's been through a lot. And I've probably reinvented myself a half dozen times over the last 25 or so years in my career. And I relate to the word resilient in that sense, and reinventing myself and open to change, like you were just, I'd never quite heard it described like that, but it resonates with me.
Yeah. It's something that I talk about certainly when I was at Northwestern with college students and my colleagues, and then certainly in my work today, at the Jed Foundation. It's something we see a lot. How can we help young people develop resiliency when there's so many distractions out there today? with all the phones and the social media, they're just bombarded with things that, how do we break through all that to keep, not only but keep their attention so that they can navigate conflict in relationships. They can navigate, if they get D- on a test, they can navigate not being selected in a fraternity, on and on and on. So I think that's really important.
Yeah, John, that's very interesting to me, that topic, I guess, because, well, I work with students. I have a lot of employees. I work with people just all the time from a variety of different areas. And one thing that I to be perfectly honest, get quite frustrated with, it's less frustration, it's more sad, because I see a lot of people, and I don't want to paint with a broad brush. I would say the younger, the more I see it, but it doesn't mean it's everyone. But an inability to handle perceived failure, to handle criticism, to look at accountability as something that isn't isn't something that's their responsibility. And I can get frustrated with it, but most of the time it just makes me sad, because I don't know what kind of life a person leads who can't, who has difficulty with in those areas. I don't think you get to be the best version of you, which is what I think everyone should strive for. Not better than John or better than Paul or better than Matt, but the best version of whoever you happen to be. And I see so much quit in people. And am I wrong? Am I just, the old man who's, looking at people, in my generation, we were tough, or is there something to that? And if there's something to it, what's going on?
I think it is for some. I think there's there needs to be a distinction between excellence and perfection. And I think a lot of people are trying for perfection, and no one is perfect. You should always try to be your best. And I think that's where a lot of people, and especially people, younger people today. Now, there's certain student populations that, there's societal barriers that are really leading to a lot of problems and hurdles for them. Black and Hispanic and Latinx young people, they have to deal with microaggressions and systemic racism that's been around for a long time, LGBTQ plus youth. And then if there's intersectionality of those identities, that even is more tricky. And so I see this all the time in my work. But I think, we have to become even more creative in how we teach resiliency, how we model it. And that requires a really broad, comprehensive approach. Teachers need to integrate it into their syllabi. They need to integrate it into their curricula. Support staff can also help with that as well. Families, we need to educate parents and families around these topics, because it's so important. So,
yeah, are you familiar with Jonathan Haidt's work at all?
No, it doesn't sound familiar.
I've read several of his books, listened to him. One of the things he discusses, or has discussed at length, is something he calls being anti-fragile, which is obviously it's a term he made up in terms of how people should or can look at the world, and it's that idea of anti-fragility, like we're trying to protect everyone so much. What we should be doing is trying to strengthen them in a sense. It's almost like, I use the example, let's say I have a young child, and we have a pool outside. Well, let's not barricade the pool, although that probably might be a good idea. But let's teach the child to swim. Let's make the child anti-fragile. If something does happen that would test the child, let's make sure that we're giving the child the tools to succeed, because at the end of the day, we're all going to face things that we don't want to necessarily face, right? It's life. Things are going to come at us that we don't want, and the more anti-fragile we are, many of those things, and then the better we'll be able to handle them. And anyway, I found his work to be very interesting, and I didn't know if you'd ever come across it, that statement in particular. But that's what I think of with some of that, and at least as far as I try to live my life and with my daughter and people I care about who I have some influence on. I go, hey, look, you're gonna run into some tough things, and rather than try to tuck you away in a corner and hope it never happens, let's be able to deal with things. And I don't mean extreme violence and some of the things that I can only imagine certain people see that I've never experienced, thankfully. But I just mean difficult times in life that most people tend to go through.
Yeah.
Anti-fragile. I always liked, I've been trying to get my 2 cents in the last 10 minutes. You guys were awesome. That's what always happens. I like, John's a quote guy. I'm an acronym guy. I always look back at failure. First attempt in learning under real world experience. Like if you're not failing, you're setting your goals too low. If you're not failing, you're not getting uncomfortable. And I feel like when you say anti-fragile, failure, adversity, it's all the same thing. Like what's the point in your journey if you don't have the ups and downs to try to deal with? John, what do you think about that?
I know. Well, it certainly was important in my growth and how I am where I am today. I mean, I'll give you one example that I can think of that still sits with me. When I graduated from Cortland, my bachelor's, I applied for doctoral programs. And I was so excited. I wanted to go get my PhD and everything. And I didn't get in. I was absolutely devastated. I said, oh, it's over. Oh my God. I'm going to have to stay at Cortland and get my master's. And oh my God.
What a failure.
But on hindsight, it was the best thing that ever happened because I got to work with a great mentor who really, like I said, took me under her wings. And, I got to experience research. I got to, really have the scientific and statistical background that, I gave me an edge up for other students when I got into the PhD program eventually. So while that was a perceived failure, it really was, and I learned from it. I grew. Yeah. And it was so important. We got to have more of that. But you also need, when you do that, you also, I think, need to be able to have space to also process it with someone, whoever that may be. It doesn't have to be a psychologist. It can be a family member. It can be a friend. Like I said, I was I kept to myself a lot as I was growing up. But at that time, I started to develop friends and I was able to connect with them. That was really important. A lot of people don't have that, to be able to talk through, a perceived failure and how you can grow from it. Really important.
So talking about perceived failure, I wanted to jump back to when you said you were having suicidal thoughts. Like, if you don't mind expressing that or sharing that, or I mean, everybody's been touched by that in more ways than we can believe. Like, and in hindsight, everybody looks back and say, "Oh my God!" Like, explain what you were going through. I guess.
Well, I think so. This was around 8th grade, 9th grade, somewhere in there. And I was starting to really recognize that I really was different. And I was scared. I was very scared. How am I going to explain this? What am I going to do? How am I going to run away from, this very painful internal experience? Because I couldn't talk to anybody about it. And, being gay, at least when I was growing up, is what some refer to as being intergenerationally horizontal. Meaning, I can't go and talk to a father or an uncle over here who's gay and say, "What's it like?" I have to do that myself. I have to think about it myself. If I'm fortunate enough, I might have a trusted other who really I could go to. But I was really alone, and I really, contemplated it. and was going to take action. And, you know, somehow I dug deep, and I won't get into the details of what it was, but I dug deep into myself, and, you know, it really mattered to see, you know, people in my lives who really cared about me. And so I just didn't do it. And somehow I had that resiliency to push through it. But it was really hard. If I hadn't had the other buckets that I mentioned, it may be a very different story today. You know,
That's interesting, because my next question is, what would you say to somebody thinking that stuff? Because I mean, let's face it, there's people out there right now contemplating the same stuff, right? It's a big world.
Well, I would say that there is help out there. You're not alone. And if you can't go to family members, there's national hotlines. You know, now there's that 988, the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, where someone can call confidentially and talk to a crisis counselor right there and then, and it's confidential. So these are available. And there's lots of other resources like that available. There's something called the Trevor Project, which is really focused on LGBTQ plus young people, and they have a hotline. There's even a veterans one for that matter. There's lots of them. There is support out there. You can get it. And, you know, what was the saying? Suicide is a long-term solution to a short-term problem. And while it may feel like it's insurmountable, it is, if you just reach out. It really is.
It really doesn't matter what walk of life you come from. I mean, there's people we probably talk to daily that might be contemplating that.
Right.
That to me it seems so overwhelming. And I mean, not on a selfish point, but like, you just don't know what other people are going through.
Right. And you know, it makes me think of one other. I'm having these flashbulb memories now. In high school, and of course, I went to the same high school as Paul's wife, Stacy, Southside High School in Elmira. You know, there happened to be a teacher there who everyone knew was gay, but they never said it. I told him, I met up with him and his partner, his long-term husband, a couple of years ago, and I said to him, and I wasn't in his class, I didn't take his class. I said, I just want you to know what influence you had on me from a distance.
Oh,
your example and your love for your husband. Again, it wasn't talked about, you know, but we knew. And he was a beloved teacher there. Stacy knows him. And I credit him for influencing me so much in those early years. And he didn't know it. I never took a class. I took singing.
And he was a unifier. Like, he was incredible at that school.
Mm-hmm.
How did he do you remember how he responded to that when you said it? Was it something he'd heard a lot before? I'm curious if how he reacted to that.
Well, by the way, we were in Provincetown. That's where he and his husband stay in the summer months. And we went out for some drinks, and I told him that, and he said he was very moved by that. And he told me that a lead administrator there at the school once said that he really credited him for really helping him learn and actually saving lives.
Wow.
So that's a long way.
Wow. Yeah. That. Wow. Good for you for saying something. Good for you for saying something too. I mean, that's interesting. I could only imagine what that would mean to someone, you know, in his shoes. So
do you think if it was today instead of 1980-ish, right? Would he have been more vocal about who he was as a person?
I don't know. That's a good question.
I don't know either. That's like, because it doesn't matter. His influence was second to none from what I've heard.
Oh God. He was really, he has a natural ability. You said unify. People are drawn to him, and for good reasons.
Right. No, I get that.
Yeah.
And so I guess the question I asked, I mean, it really doesn't matter. Who cares if he talked more about it? The point was, his intentions as a person and what he did for students and faculty, right?
And I realize, yes, and I realize, given what I went through and what I know, is that there's young people out there today that are watching and observing. So I take very seriously my role as mentoring and, being vocal as I can be, so that people know they can reach out to me and that I'm an example, just like he was to me.
Hey, John, when we first started just talking, you'd mentioned suicide, and I scribbled it down real fast. You'd mentioned it was a huge issue today, but which is not surprising. But you said it in a way that made me think that is it more of an issue today than it maybe has been in the past? And if so, why? And maybe I misread you.
Well, certainly suicides are up. The preliminary data from 2022, which is the most recent we have, it's almost 50,000. And that's the highest ever in the United States.
Wow.
I think it's for a lot of reasons. It's a much more complicated world. It's a less kinder world. We see wars, we see gun violence, we see, hatred, we see, oh my God, just the gambit, and then couple that with access to weapons, access to lethal means. It all sort of comes together and makes for, suicides being out. Now, during, I think it was 2019 and 2020, the rates went down a little bit, or maybe 2020, 21, I can't remember. But anyway, we thought maybe that was the COVID effect. But actually, preliminary data from 2022 out of the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, indicates it's close to 50,000, which is the highest. So, yeah, it's a complex public health issue, and that's why it requires layers of action. Being proactive.
I was talking about it this week as I had a close friend's son who took his life last week, and it's so easy. I think in this day and age, we're so detached sometimes from everything everybody else does. It's easy to say, well, I don't know why they do that, or I don't know what they were thinking. And the whole point is we don't, because you have to be in such a complete different mindset, right? And I'm not there, and I hope I'm never there. But the empathy, like, I don't think society tries to figure out enough why people go through those things. And there's certainly, I know there's hotlines, but I don't think there's enough help as there should be.
And there's not enough, that's a whole nother conversation we could have about, mental health professionals. We just are experiencing a huge gap in the pipeline coming out of training programs, and especially mental health professionals who are of color, mental health professionals who are LGBTQ+. And why is that important? Because young people their first preference is to work with somebody who looks like them and has shared identities. So, to about 2 to 3% of psychologists coming out of doctoral programs are psychologists of color. That's low. Why is that? We have to take a look at that. Psychiatrists, it's even worse, medical degrees. Why is that? That's a very important question that we have to ask. Why are we not producing more clinicians of color? So, and then not to mention insurance and the cost and all that type of thing.
Yeah, in a country we have a lot, like we joke around a lot, first world problems, or there's no AC, or, oh my gosh, my Amazon shipment came a day late. Like we joke about stuff like that, but for the stuff that really matters with human life, there's not a lot of resources going that way.
No. Now, I've been very encouraged by our current Surgeon General. I mean, he's really, I think he's really finally, not just him, that office is paying attention to mental health. I mean, he's talked about loneliness being a pandemic in this nation, and the role of the impact of social media. it's really encouraging to see that office and that Surgeon General really make this a priority, which is really important. So the 988, the switch to that number, there was, since 2005, there was a National Suicide Prevention Hotline, but the number was really long. It's not easy to remember. So they switched to 988 last July 2022. And it gets a lot of calls, a lot of volume.
So on your cell phone, that's all you punch, 988.
Huh.
Yeah.
Wow.
See, I didn't
It's
even know
terrible.
that. I
I-
wasn't even
People
aware.
don't know about it.
Yeah.
There was a great study that came out that was done. Who did it? Oh God, I'm blanking on it now. But they find that the vast majority of Americans don't even know that it exists, and it's been, it's meant to make it a lot easier.
So why don't we know about it? Like it's not as simple as just advertising it.
Yeah, I don't know. That's what this study was looking at. So what can we do to make sure that, that's where it requires more marketing, more getting it on social media. That's what people are paying attention to. Now, the people that are really more familiar with it are the Black, the Hispanic, the LGBT
Wow.
plus young people, because they're searching for that help.
Mm.
And so that's one of the things that study found is that they seem to be more likely to be familiar with it.
I look back, I mean, I'm a 70s and 80s kid. I think we all are kind of in that same time frame, right? We went outside. We didn't have a Weather Channel app. If it rained, it rained, We didn't have parents texting us it's time to come home. We certainly didn't have Facebook, Instagram. There was nothing to compare our experiences with except just going to live your experience. And I feel like that's so hard today because, like, I could be having the greatest day and somebody I know, wins $10,000 on the lottery. And deep inside, I'd be like, man, I'm pissed at that person. Right? Like, I mean, I feel like gratitude and just living your life, it's so hard. And that's why numbers like 988, I'm rambling a little bit. I hope you can kind of see where I'm going with this. The fact that you just kind of did your thing, and it's so easy at any point in a day to pivot and say, I'm having a great day, but I don't have that, so now my day sucks.
Yes.
And I feel bad about that. Like, I feel like I can differentiate it, but I still feel like I get caught up in that sometimes.
Like I get worried how much, and I'm just as guilty of this as anybody else, how much time I spend on social media and my phone. And, I think social media can be used for a lot of good, but there's also bad things that happen and that impact people in negative ways as well as positive. And so, but we're competing with, that immediate gratification, so it's very addictive.
So what do you do about it? I mean, I don't know the answer. I'm putting you on the spot. Like
I always,
in the words of John Dunkle, what do you do about it?
Well, what I always encourage people to do, and I try to do this myself, is I unplug myself. I do it for many hours a day and only allow myself to go on for a certain time. And then I stay on there for only a certain amount of time. It's really important to disconnect like that. Like I don't watch the news in the morning. I might read the New York Times, but I find it's important to really find some time to disconnect, go outside and walk, go and do, whatever you do to relax. That's not part of social media. It's really important.
It's funny that's great because for years I've been a proponent of cell phones in the classroom. Like, it's okay. Keep it out of reach. Let me see it. This year when the students come back, when they're in my class for 2 hours, it's the first year I'm going to have them put them on the back counter. Like, they can see them, and I'm not saying they can't take a phone call. And of course they have their watches that trip when their phone's ringing. But I feel like the 2 hours we're together, we don't need the cell phone. I've kind of flipped from 5-10 years ago, and I think we'll be better off for it. I don't know. I'll let you know 180 days from now how it goes. But
I've always been, I think it's just too much of a distraction, and we're too connected sometimes. Again, they can be used for a lot of good too.
Absolutely.
But when when I'm sitting, I'll never forget one time I took my niece to dinner to meet some friends, and she's sitting there, and she's on her phone, and I said, "Give me that." I try to talk, engage a little bit, but it's just too many distractions, and I don't know.
You know what my daughters tell me if I'm on my phone? They're like, I'm gonna mess this up, but you're gonna get the gist of it. Phone's down, friends on.
Yes, I like
That's what they say. And I'm like,
I
friend,
like that.
like
Yeah.
you're right, and I hate you for it. Right? You're right.
That'd be
Matt,
fair.
at work, like, how is it with employees? Like, you can't tell them they can't have their phone.
I mean, you can lie to yourself and pretend that's what's happening, but that's not particularly, I don't find lying to myself so good technique. Um, it's difficult because, as John pointed out, there's some positives there. With certain people, I can access them a lot quicker, and they can be multitasking because of it better than a traditional phone in some of those ways. But it is a distraction, and it's one of mine and Paul's pillars, John, is called trade-offs. Everything in life is a trade-off. There's just no solutions. There's trade-offs, and it's a great example of trade-offs. Hey, social media, cell phones, they got a lot of great things with them, as you'd mentioned, but man, there's a downside too, and it's almost like, how do you do your best to mitigate that downside, and educate yourself on what it is, and then do your best to avoid it. But from our standpoint, Paul, the answer is we've never been effective doing it, and I'm not sure if we did what the trade-off would be, and what we would lose without it. So it's a great question though, and the biggest thing, the problem with it, in my opinion, is I'm not engaged the way I should be. I'm not in the moment, right? I'm not in the moment, and we all see the people walking down the street, or the picture of a sporting event where someone's doing a great thing, or a concert, and everyone is taking a picture, and it's like, are you here? I know you want the picture, but also there's something to be said for being in the moment. I don't think you're in the moment if your focus is on the picture. So it's interesting.
Have you ever? So, oh, go ahead, John.
I was going to say, you can't be truly present, and you have to be honest with yourself, that you're not present. And when you're not present, I think young people today, and not just young people, I think others too, they pride themselves on the fact that they think they can multitask well, but you can't. I'm sorry.
No, I agree with you wholeheartedly. You're just missing something there. You're not in that moment. And for me, especially the older I get, I don't know about you guys, the older I get, the moments are what I treasure, the being in the moment with my wife, my daughter, my family, my friends, just outside, right? Hitting a golf ball, taking a walk. Those are the things frankly worth living for. Not checking my phone to see how many likes I got on, the dinner I posted, or whatever it happens to be.
So have you ever been to a concert or a performer where they take your phones?
No.
I have.
Really? Like, what do they do?
It's a bag, and I forget the name of it. I should know the name of it. But you walk in the front door, and the people at the front, ticket takers, security, they have hundreds and hundreds of thousands of these bags, and I keep waiting for the name to come. And you hand them your phone. I'm sorry, they hand you the bag. You put your phone in the bag, but you cannot open it. So you get to maintain holding your phone in the bag. You can't access it. And then when you leave, you walk out the door, they have to kind of scan it, or, you know what I mean? Hit it with something, and it'll unlock it. You pull your phone out and you give it back to them. So yes. And gosh, I wish I could think of the name of it. In any case, that's what I've experienced. Well, I've been to that, and then I went to the Masters this year, the golf tournament, and you're not allowed to bring a phone in the Masters. You're not even allowed. allowed access to the golf course with it. You better leave it in your car or throw it in the bushes. You're not going in with it. And a couple of the Masters and the other event I'm thinking of with a bag, two of the best events I've been to in forever, as long as I can remember, because you're present the whole time. You're just present. What's really scary is the first hour, all you're doing is tapping your leg, looking for your phone. You're doing all these, you're having this psychosis because your phone's not there. And then once you let go, it's like 1989 again, guys.
Yeah, we've lived at least half our life without them.
Mhm.
Approximately, yeah.
And I leave the house now. I'm like, where's my phone? I've literally, I know you've
Keys,
all done
wallet,
it.
phone.
We turn around and I go back and get my phone. But I lived my whole child like without it.
Yeah, perfectly well.
Do you
Well,
know? Do you know in college when I played golf, my dad would want to know how I played. So I'd go to the nearest payphone and I'd call my dad collect. And he didn't want to accept the charges. So they go a collect call from, I'd go 77. And they're like, collect call from 77. My dad's like, no thanks.
Score. Okay.
Yeah. And would hang up.
Oh, that's funny.
Like kids, like they can't even fathom that today. Because first of all, you could follow the round live online, like hole by hole. Like nobody knew. And I don't even know if I could go back to that. That's the sad part.
Wow.
Yeah.
When I moved to Chicago in 1995, I started exploring, clubs and whatnot and bars and whatnot. And back then we didn't have the phones and we literally had to talk to each other. Now everyone's on their phone. On the train, you get on the train in the morning. It's like I counted one day, there are 20 people and like most of them had a phone in their hand looking at it.
Yeah, it's an epidemic, isn't it?
Instead of forming relationships, they're saying, how are you today? Or where are you going? Or
oh my God. And I live in a high rise here in New York, and I live on the 42nd floor. And when it stops, I can guarantee you whoever gets on is going to have a phone in their hand. They're looking at the phone. I don't know how they get service in the elevator. I don't. Then they'll walk and they'll be walking and they won't be looking and they'll like run into you almost.
Oh yeah. I've experienced that plenty. Yep.
There was I saw this today. It doesn't mean it's true. There's an Instagram influencer that supposedly was hanging out her car, like taking photos, and then she hit a light pole and died.
Oh my God.
Like she's hanging out the car, and then there's like the pole on the side of the road. Now, I saw it. It doesn't mean it's true. But I believe that happens. Yeah. If that makes sense.
Yeah. I just think I just get worried, and I'm guilty of this sometimes myself.
Me too.
That we're not present. And I have to literally turn my phone over, turn it off. I don't even want to know it. It does connect to my Apple Watch, which I don't know how to change it, but I think I can figure it out. But I just can't, you can't be truly present. And really, like I went to a Giants game. I told you about my friend. He took me to a Giants game this last year, and I wanted to film them scoring a touchdown. So they did, but I couldn't cheer and everything because I was holding my camera. I couldn't really have the experience, as you said, Matt.
Right.
So
yeah, it's true. And I've tried to get more away from that and experience. I'm not perfect from it by any means, but I think being forced into it, a couple of those events, it really was a eye opener for me. Like that, hey, you're missing something you forgot you were missing.
Yeah.
Sometimes Matt's presence has ruined our friendship. Do you know sometimes he takes like 23 hours to get back to me on a text?
Oh no. And you saw that he read the text, right? You can see
yeah, like I'm like, you know what? That's fine. I can go find other people, I'm joking, but I admire it really.
Hey John, I got a question for you regarding your buckets, the buckets you mentioned that I wanted to ask you. Relationships, self-reflection, self-awareness, your resiliency. All those are three things coming from what, in my judgment, is a highly successful person, and I think that's what most people are aiming for. Are those three things things that you were born with, or are those things people can work on? If I'm an 18-year-old right now and I'm going, you know what? John's an impressive guy. This resonates with me. I want to accomplish things like John. But you know what? I'm not all that self-aware, or boy, do I have a difficult time, creating relationships. You follow where I'm going? I mean, what do you tell someone like that? Or you just say, hey, you're either born with it or you're not?
I think it's a little bit of both, born and you learn. I think, I'll say this about my parents. My parents really taught me a lot of lessons, and my brothers and sisters, about hard work and all that. But we weren't really touchy-feely. I wouldn't say they're the most self-reflective. I didn't learn that from them. I learned that in my training. I learned that in my relationships outside. Doesn't mean I don't love my parents, but I didn't learn that through them. I learned hard work. I learned don't whine. I learned, treat people with respect, those types of things from them. But I do think that, it does require, really looking for opportunities to learn. And I did that in my time. Now, another important thing that I didn't mention that I don't want to underestimate, in my doctoral program, I took a course on career development, and we read an article once on the role of luck in career development.
Okay.
And I do think there's some truth to that. But you need to be able to see that window and take advantage of it. Like, for example, my doctoral dissertation chair happened to be at Northwestern University for a job interview. And this was around 95, when I was just finishing my doctorate degree. And she was there, and she had me talking to the search committee at Northwestern. They said they're looking for a psychologist who has expertise and interest in working with gay and lesbian youth. And she got on the phone and said, John, you have to go apply for this. Here's the information, go do it. If she wasn't there, that wouldn't have happened.
Right. Yeah.
So that's an example of luck and circumstance that you got to be able to jump on it when you see it.
But real quick, you were also in the position to be able to jump on it.
Yes.
Like I tell kids all the time, they're on the highway of life, just rolling along. They don't even understand what exits they could potentially take. Like, they don't look at the exits. Like, you looked at the exit and saw that and said, wow, why wouldn't I stop there for a while? And that's where your journey takes you. If that dumb analogy makes sense. I don't know.
Yes, and I visited Chicago once, and I said I really loved it, and I thought, oh my God, I would love to live in Chicago. I had a job interview at Georgia State University in Atlanta, and I got an offer. But then I got an interview, and I said, hey, I want to hold on that until I go here. And I'm glad I did, because next thing you know, I'm there 25 years. But, the other thing that, if you can learn to conquer it, don't let fear drive you. Fear can be so seductive, and it can keep you from going outside of your comfort level.
Comfort zone.
I grew up in small Amari, New York. I never thought I would go away. And, it was through those experiences that I really stretched myself. And
I think deliberately putting yourself in uncomfortable positions, within reason, of course. I'm not talking safety, but is one of the things that I'm constantly preaching, as well. Is I have a mantra, John. If I'm comfortable, I've got to get uncomfortable. And I'll tell you a quick story. My daughter, who's 24 years old, she was growing up, and I was always preaching to her, because I was trying to build my businesses. I was taking calculated risks, and I was failing, and I was succeeding. I was going through this whole process, and I was telling her all the time, hey, you got to get comfortable being uncomfortable. When you're comfortable, it's a sign you're not pushing enough, you're not doing enough, if you want to grow and stretch and accomplish, and the things that I was trying to do. And this was probably 4 or 5 years ago. My and my wife's businesses were going fantastic, and we're doing wonderful in all these areas in our lives. And my daughter pulled me aside. She was probably 18 or 19 at the time, and she said, hey, Dad, I got to tell you something. You seem awfully comfortable to me right now. And she wasn't saying it as a compliment. She was saying hey, maybe it's time to get uncomfortable again. And I'll never forget it. And I took it to heart. And but whether it's your business or your education or your relationships with your, maybe you just want to do something within your community and make an impact in your community. Well, you got to go out and get a little uncomfortable, right? Maybe knock on some doors, talk to some people you've never talked to before, do some things that you've never quite done before. And that discomfort, that zone right there, that's growth, right? I mean, my wife's pregnant right now. She's uncomfortable all the time because that baby's growing.
Wow, absolutely. I totally agree. And I didn't even mention, as I'm talking this through a little bit, the biggest hurdle that I dealt with patients in my therapy work is helping them to navigate ambiguity. Life is about the gray areas. And most of the issues that we deal with, being relational and whatnot, there's a lot of ambiguity and there's not any clear answers all the time. And that can be very anxiety provoking and other provoking. So,
interesting. Very interesting. Yeah.
That makes sense. With that ambiguity, not having, necessarily all the answers is a skill. It's something it takes practice.
Yeah. Yeah. Very interesting.
John, in our young podcast, your episode 87, you are now our house psychologist. Psychiatrist. I'm just letting you know that. So you have to come back, good or bad. It is what it is. You have to come back on again. Is that okay?
I'd love to. This is fun.
Also, Matt's local. Next time you're back in town, you and Matt need to meet in person.
Awesome.
100%. I would love it, John. It's been so nice hearing from you and talking to you. And I just looked at my clock and went, what happened? That's a compliment. I certainly hope to meet in person and hear more about what you're currently doing, what you've done in the past. I mean, you're a fascinating person, and it's been a pleasure.
Just like to tell my story. That's all. Everyone has a story, and I love hearing the stories.
That's what this is about.
And we didn't really get too much into your story at Northwestern or the Jed Foundation. I mean, we have so much material. Like, you're coming back, whether you like it or not.
Love it. I love that.
Someday when we have our studio, you'll be in there with the headphones on.
That sounds
well.
Good.
Hey, you're moving in a couple of weeks, so safe travels.
Thank you.
I'm excited.
I noticed the lighting wasn't really good. Are you going to be able to brighten that a little bit? I just realized that.
We'll figure it out. Yeah, it's funny. Most people, when the podcast comes on, they don't watch it; they listen, right? Like when I'm walking, I've got it on, but it's there because
handsome fellas like us, John. I think they're going to be watching.
I just realized as we got halfway through, and I didn't want to interrupt the flow of the conversation. Otherwise, I'm going to turn the light on.
Mine can do the same thing. I don't know what I don't know what it is, but I have the same problem.
I look like one of those people who are getting interviewed on the news. They don't want to be seen with a dark light.
No, you don't.
All right.
Well, No, you don't. Hey, John, thank you so much. I mean, I've known a lot of your story. This was so much fun. Again, if anybody's struggling with like thoughts or life or what they're doing, what resources can they call or reach out to again?
Well, first of all, I think they should reach out to the person or people they trust the most first. And there's also other things like the 988 National Suicide Hotline, Lifeline. And it's also, you can also text it and you reach a professional right away. And so I can also, if you want, send you some other links that if you want to put it at the end of the podcast that people know. But that 988 is one that we're really trying to educate more and more people about.
No, I would like that a lot because at the end of the day, it's like that. Reach out. You might get through the day, the evening, and next thing you know, you've got a whole new purpose or meaning. Your life's hit a new trajectory, right? But doing something drastic is not going to help your cause.
And you never know the trusted people that my people who I trust are going to be different than yours, and who I feel most comfortable with reaching out. That's something that requires to really think carefully about who that is and who they are. So,
Sure. Very personal stuff.
mhm.
John, I've known you for a long time, and I always have a great time. Like every time we've been in person, the conversation, I mean, we just talk forever. And then finally my wife's like, we gotta go, so I I appreciate it. Like you're inspiring. I love your journey. I love your story. I was excited to have Matt meet you. I'm excited for our viewers to hear your story, and you'll be back. I'm telling you.
Awesome. Well, I look forward to it. That was great.
All right. Thanks, John.
Thanks,
Take care,
John.
both of you. Bye-bye.
Bye.